Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Chris Dworkin from Imperium. Today we're going to be talking about why you need to CYA. So cover your apps is going to be the topic of our session for today. I'm joined today by my colleague, Rajiv Gupta. Rajiv, if you wouldn't mind, you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, well, thanks, Chris. Yes, hi, everyone. My name is Rajiv. I'm responsible for the app protection business here at Imperium, and we will together be presenting you the case study for why you need to protect your apps and cover your apps from all different type of risks and vulnerabilities out there.
Thanks, Rajiv. Just a couple quick points for everybody that's listening live. So we'll be doing our best to keep the webinar content to around 30 minutes today. We'll have some Q&A at the end. If you do have a question, please submit it in the Q&A portion of the Zoom meeting, not the chat. This will be in the Q&A. So with that, I'm going to get started and we will get going. So most organizations today, as we all probably know, have mobile apps, right? And in fact, for many organizations, the mobile app is the biggest portion of their business, right? For some organizations, the mobile app is their business. So mobile has become the primary channel by which businesses engage, interact, and sell to their consumers. Some interesting data that I recently had an opportunity to read actually said that mobile usage globally has continued to hit all-time highs, which should be no surprise. And overall web usage is being surpassed quite significantly by mobile. So mobile now represents over 50% of the total web page views. Pretty interesting. Some other recent data showed that the mobile device usage, over 90%, almost 90% of the usage is in apps versus web browsing. So again, another interesting trend that we're seeing over the course of the last couple of years here. Another one was there's now over 3.7 billion unique users on mobile. So with all that being said, right, it's significant, right? Engagement with our consumers on mobile has been kind of a key point that many organizations are striving for. Unfortunately, our consumers, like myself, like probably everyone on this webinar, have really high expectations of what we want from an experience. We have an expectation that the performance of our apps are going to be significant. We're pretty impatient people quite often. We expect lots of features. We want feature-rich experiences. Quite often, consumers are choosing their apps or platforms based on that as their choice. And they'll leave to go someplace else if of course, they're seeing a better experience elsewhere. And people want personalization. It's the other thing that has become a recent trend in what's driving people to make changes and updates and new enhancements in their applications. So all the above items are forcing companies to approach mobile and mobile apps differently than they have in the past. They're shifting their focus to innovation on the platform. With those shifts in innovation is also coming this shift and concern around making sure that the platforms and the apps are secure. And that is obviously where we come in as Imperium. So we're going to talk a lot more about that as we continue to go on here. So let me move on. There's definitely a few different camps that are out there right now when we think about what is the risk on mobile. So we have a chance to talk to people every single day. Some feel that the risk is minimal. Some don't believe there is a risk, which is interesting. Most, though, know the risk is present, but they can't necessarily determine what to do to best solve for the problems that they're seeing. So we'll definitely continue to talk throughout the prezo about that, about why this new endpoint of mobile is at significant risk. And we're going to provide you a lot of examples along the way. I'm going to come back to this slide in a couple of minutes, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these specific areas and why they are issues. And first, though, I want to turn over to Rajiv. Rajiv's going to talk a little bit about the actual device, the apps, where some of those exposures are, go into a couple of examples, and then we'll transition back over to me in a couple. So with that, Rajiv, just let me know if I need to advance slides for you as well. And over to you.
Absolutely. So if you can go to the next, yeah. So guys, if you look at this particular slide, right, I mean, it talks about first thing is to, if you look at your mobile app, you know, what all is inside the mobile app, right? How is the mobile app stacked up in terms of the kind of data and what's inside the app? So you look at your app has, of course, a different type of resources there. You may have caching. Caching is a pretty integral part of every mobile app, mainly because you know, it allows you to provide a much more richer, better experience, especially when the app, when the device is not on a great network connectivity. Caching becomes an integral part of a user experience. You definitely have a lot of static data, your IP inside your app. There's always a user associated with the app. That means there's an identity, user identity, and authentication keys, remote API access keys, all sorts of network and keys and encryption keys. There's a lot of keys and IDs that are inside the app. A lot of times, the teams have done generally a good job in making sure the keys are encrypted. However, the decryption keys are also right there in memory, somewhere in the sandbox, not very hard to find. And the apps do, you know, especially the sensitive apps, the banking apps or the fintech, they do some sort of a rudimentary jailbreak check to make sure that the device is clean. But that check is not enough, as we'll talk more about it. And then there is also, you know, your third-party libraries and other frameworks that are in there. And the app is making probably a bunch of different type of system calls. So you may be tapping into the GPS, the camera, all different capabilities that the mobile device provides. Now, if you look at all that information that's going on inside the app and how it communicates back to the server, on the server side, you definitely have a lot of protection today. There's, you know, this area has been in place for ages and ages, and there's a lot of security in place to make sure we look for cross-site scripting, misconfigurations, brute force attacks, denial of service, whatnot, right? So there's definitely that piece is solved. But if you look at the on the right side, the boxes in the red, that's where I think that the security is missing. You know, the attacks coming from malware, all types of botnets and ransomware, third-party library risk, your dynamic runtime injection, swizzling, hooking, your ability to just replace a library, you know, a dynamic library inside the app with a fake library, or manipulate the configuration for the app to start communicating to a different endpoint, for example, exploiting your device vulnerabilities from 0 days in terms of whether system tampering, disabling code signing. So you can actually do the hooking. You can hook a keylogger, for example, to start extracting information. Or if nothing else, extracting information directly from the memory, taking the memory dumps for the process for the application running in, and then using that dump to extract information. There's a lot of other threats coming in from the network side also, ability to, you know, do an ARP man in the middle, TLS downgrade so that you can attack the app. Or even at the cellular level, like femtocells or NFC proxies and whatnot. So all these things inject a lot more risk into the app and your ability to lose information, as we see in the stat. Once these keys and IDs are compromised, it allows the bad guys to not just sensitive information from the app, but give them the ability to recreate the workflow to the back end. And at that point in time, they don't even need the app anymore. They have extracted everything they needed, whatever they need to know. And at this point in time, they can just start talking to the back end from outside of the app itself and start to exploit. And so the threat actually moves from the device at that point in time into the back end. So with that, let's move to the next slide. So hopefully this gives you the idea of all different ways the app can be attacked. And here is an example, right? So we have a couple of examples here where the similar approach was used. You guys may have heard recently in the news about the Air Canada, where they confirmed the breach that impacted more than 20,000 customers. And, you know, they said the impact is as big as 1.7 million mobile app users. And the data that was getting compromised, basically, you know, it's amazing the amount of sensitive information that's in the app, right? Starting with your passport number, the expiration date, the country of residence, your nexus number, gender, date of birth, nationality, and on, right? So there's a lot of sensitive information that's at stake. And for that reason, Air Canada asked all the customers to reset the passwords, to add another layer of precaution when the breach actually happened. Similarly, if you go and look at the the next slide, the British Airways hack, the same exact thing. Their mobile app was the reason for the attack, at least one of the reasons, other than the website. And this is where it becomes a little fuzzy, because the threat may start from the mobile app, then spread into the web. The mobile app could be the reason the bad guys figured out the backend API workflows, extracted all the different keys, endpoint information, all that ability to reverse engineer the app, and then use that information to actually go directly into the backend. So a couple of examples here hopefully give you the idea how a weak mobile app or unprotected mobile app can lead to can cascade those threats to the server side. Next.
Yeah, thanks, Rajiv. And that was one great point you made. It's something that we've talked about a lot in some other webinars about. While the attack may have started at the mobile device, it may not have ended there, right? There's lots of other things that are taking place once these exposures are being identified, and attacks are taking place maybe on the web or other locations. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on as well. So I want to just stop and go back to this slide for a moment. And we want to talk for a second about why this is so difficult for folks to protect these endpoints, right? So traditionally, you said it before as well, Rajiv, we've layered on security in certain areas, usually within our back office systems, our network communications. These are really well protected because we've been doing it for years. We understand them really well. But unfortunately, mobile devices, these are the new endpoint that is the preference of the majority of our consumers out there. And these endpoints are sitting out there and they're completely exposed. They're waiting for attackers to have their way with it, however they choose to. So we've got to stop, take a step back, and think about what the real issue actually is. So for starters, you don't control the environment in which your apps are being operated, right? Once you deploy an app to the App Store, we have no control over where our users open that app, use that app. So not only do you not control it, you really lose most of the visibility once that app is deployed as well. So you can't tell what's happening within the operating environment for these apps once deployed. So that's a major challenge that we have to figure out how to deal with. The other major problem is that the user is the admin of these devices. We can't control them either. So unlike a lot of corporate environments where we have MDMs or other means for managing what does and doesn't make it onto that device, or what apps are installed and leveraged, and when we hit the consumer world, we lose all those controls. So we can't control the Wi-Fi the user connects to, or the device configs that the user defines, or the other apps that the user installs. So all of these things are actually what put our app and our enterprise and corporate assets at risk. So when we think about the different attack vectors and where we stay focused ourselves, we look at three primary threat vectors, right? The device attacks, network attacks, and malicious apps. So let's start with the far right on this, with malicious apps. So on Android, malicious apps are much more prevalent than they are on iOS. But let's talk for a second about what they are and how they differ. So they're not targeted attacks. I think most of us probably realize that when a malicious app is actually put out there, the intent is to cast a real wide net, see how much information that we can gather. We do something with that information we gather later on. So Apple's done a pretty good job of keeping the malicious apps out of their app store. Doesn't mean that iOS can't get malware. It just means that they've done a better job of protecting their stores. So the other thing we've got to be concerned about, right? Every day people are jailbreaking their phones so they can install content, or they can do things that haven't been necessarily vetted by Apple. If that stuff happens, well, then it means anything is possible. So let's talk though for a second about network and device attacks, because these are quite different. So this is where we start dealing with more targeted situations. So if you believe your organization has data information that's critical, Well, then you need to be prepared for the more targeted approaches that some of the bad actors are going to take to try to get to your data, get to your information or your users. They're not going to put a malicious app out on the App Store and hope someone downloads it. What they're going to do is they're going to sit in a coffee shop across the street from your office building, hang out on your campus somewhere. They're going to do something that will allow them, usually to start with some kind of a network-based attack, get you to do something to allow them to put malware out on your device, as an example. So their ultimate goal is not to just monitor some traffic from your app or your device. Their ultimate goal is to gain an elevation of privilege on your device and gain some kind of persistent foothold so that they can do whatever they would like to do. So the areas that we in Zimperium have focused the majority of our time and efforts for a lot of years now has been in these areas to make sure that we can protect from these types of events. And I'm going to hand over to Rajiv, and after one more slide, he can dig into a little bit more about our Z9 technology in a moment. But just one more quick example. So this was another example. This is about a little over a year ago. Through exposures in the mobile app, the attackers were able to reverse engineer the Tesco mobile banking app. Once they reverse engineered it, they realized that once authenticated against those backend APIs, they didn't not only have access to the one account that was supposed to be theirs, they gained access to all the accounts, all customer accounts. So what that meant was they were able to quickly take 2.5 million pounds from over 9,000 customer accounts. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end for them, right? They again continued to figure out and do their root cause analysis, figure out how to fix those vulnerabilities. The real cost for Tesla came when the fines hit them. So about 3 months ago, I believe it was, 2 to 3 months ago, the fines finally came down because of this vulnerability that they had and the attack, and they were fined 21 million pounds for this occurrence. So again, the cost isn't just about what was taken from customers. It continues to pile on for lots of different things. Fines being one, cost to close up some of these exposures in their apps is obviously another completely different topic, but it's significant. So one of the quick thing that I'm going to hit on, and then again I'll turn back over to you, Rajiv. So one of the other interesting things for us has been the amount of overlay attacks, and Bankbot specifically has been something that's been critical. For those who don't know our Z Labs team, so Z Labs is our research organization. They are nothing short of amazing. They spend countless hours looking for vulnerabilities, exposures that are out there that they can then properly disclose to different organizations or whomever may be experiencing those. Now, in this case, they found a version of Bankbot that they actually reverse engineered. And what they found was that over 650 institutions, applications, organizations were being targeted. So this isn't just banking apps. Some bulk of them were banking apps, but there were tech companies, there were healthcare companies, services apps and companies. So unfortunately, I would love to put a list of those organizations up here so everybody knows if they were or were not being targeted. But because of responsible disclosure practices we follow, we can't openly discuss this. But in the past, we've made mention of this. If you're interested, feel free to email us, call us, and we're happy to let you know offline if you're being targeted or not, and what you can do to help to resolve for that. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about what these Bankbot things are, these overlay attacks are all about. So primarily they're Android targeting malware. They use overlay screens and they mimic banking apps or as I said, some other apps as well, banking being the primary focus for Bankbot. So the first thing that actually happens is the user will install some utility app. That utility app will contain Bankbot. So this could be a game, this could be a calculator, this could be any kind of app with the Bankbot Trojan embedded into it. Bankbot then monitors. Well, actually, before the monitoring starts, what that utility app will do is it will actually go out to the command and control to take the list of apps on that device, send them out, see if there's any that match what they're looking for, pull that set of overlay screens back. So now when one of those apps actually launches, instead of your app launching, what actually launches is the overlay screen. So at that point, the user will actually go and put in their credentials. The user has no idea that this stuff is taking place. So they put their credentials in. Those credentials are then provided to Bankbot's command and control again. They're sent out and they just get collected. The Bankbot robots the target app that it's hiding with the fraudulent transactions, and then closes down like normal. And the user typically will never know that it happened. So we actually have some other webinars that are up on our YouTube channel or up on the website as well, that anybody can go and take a look at, that were specific to Bankbot. They're great. They actually have some videos of Bankbot actually operating and what we're doing to help protect against it. So anyone can go, please feel free to take a look at those also. And with that, Rajiv, I'm going to turn back over to you, talk a little bit about Z9 and what we're doing to help actually protect from some of these things that we're talking about so far.
Well, thanks, Chris. Yeah, absolutely. So, I think some of you guys may already know our core engine is called Z9. It's our machine learning, deep learning engine that's embedded inside the SDK that you use to protect your apps. The engine actually, works to detect threats that are across the device, network, and apps. And it's really interesting because, if you think about, let's start with the apps, right? So malicious apps. Today, everybody who has something in this space or trying to provide a solution in this space, they look for malware on the device, but then they use all sorts of either signatures or comparing the entire binaries across the databases of millions and millions of other apps they have analyzed in the past. And they say, oh, well, I see similarity or I see an exact match. So your app or this app must be malicious. Whereas our approach, we use machine learning on device to tell you that this app is malicious. So even if side-loaded an app, you're in an airplane mode, or if you're connected to a network, that network is compromised, we could still tell you that you have a malicious app on device. Most of the time, if the attack is coming from a network, the bad guy owns the network, and in that case, if the network is compromised, you cannot really rely on the server side or cloud-based detections to tell you that, okay, there's something wrong going on the device. So that's why we truly believe in on-device detection for all different type of threats that we detect. And that's why our patented machine learning engine comes into the picture. We detect all sorts of network attacks, even all the device compromises, whether it's jailbreak, rooting, or system tampering, disabling of the code signing on iOS, any time an app is trying to break out of the sandbox and trying to go lateral on the device, we know about it and we will let the app know. So our Z9 engine is going to pick it up, give you a callback within the app when you implement the SDK, and you will be able to take a remediation action inside the SDK to say, okay, well, I see this type of threat, and what do I need to do about it? And as I said, again, repeating myself here, but it's all on device. And that's the beauty of it. You don't have to rely on cloud servers or cloud-based detection and to tell you that there's something wrong on the device. So the engine, we talked about Z9, can be consumed in two different ways. One is, of course, our standalone app called Zips, which is our Zimperium intrusion prevention system. This is basically deployed either directly through the App Store or the Play Store. We have our app called Zips in the stores, or pushed through the MDM agents, mobile device management, like Mobile Iron, AirWatch, and the alike. Or you can just consume our Z9 engine as part of the SDK that we are talking today, and embed that into your own app. Basically, the ZIAP is Zimperium in-app protection. And that's the best way to protect your consumer apps, because you cannot have a managed profile on those devices. But once you add the SDK, you not only protect the app, but you also get this threat telemetry data to the server side, where you can see exactly what's going on the consumer devices, what kind of a threat landscape your apps are operating in, And based on that data, you can do a lot of learning, and you can feed that data also into your fraud backends, which can take actions. A lot of the customers, they just do simply add what you call a multi-factor authentication chain, right? So you may be asked for another factor in authentication chain if the threat is perceived to be higher than normal, right? So there are a lot of ways to remediate, but the SDK allows you to actually have all those possibilities. Chris?
Thanks, Rajiv. So I'm going to actually go through one more example of one of our customers that we've deployed to. And again, we love to talk about this use case. It's one that is kind of near and dear to us. So with that, let me dive right in. So mobile banking app. This was one of the first primary reasons that this customer wanted to deploy. So when they had first started having discussions with us, they said, you know what, we're struggling with visibility. And both Rajiv and I have talked a little bit about visibility on what's happening within the operating environment once these apps are deployed. It's a struggle for a lot of organizations. So whether you're looking to figure out, what's going on from a fraud perspective or something else, you need to be able to see what's happening once your consumers are using these apps and devices. So in this case, this was the first 30 days of deployment. The customer had embedded our ZF technology into their mobile banking app. What they found was really, in my opinion, kind of scary. Over 900,000 risk-related items were identified in the first 30 days of deployment, even less than 30 days. When we continued to dig into that to figure out what was really going on, there were over 26,000 devices that were actively being attacked or had already been compromised. So every one of those 26,000 devices, if you think about it, we're talking about attacks that had occurred or compromises that occurred during the slice of time when these banking apps were being used. So that is significant, and it poses a huge risk for our organization, as well as our assets that we're trying to protect. So what they came back to us and said, though, was, look, we never had the visibility into what was taking place out there. We would just deal with the fraud claims as they came in. So you've now given us visibility into $1.1 billion worth of potential fraud that we can now protect. So that is a huge win for them, win for us as well. So if we dig a little bit deeper into what were some of the findings, what we see is, and again, I think most people have this perception that malicious apps are one of our biggest concerns or issues. They are a big one. There's no doubt about that. But in this case, there were only 2,000 devices that have malicious apps on them out of the 26,000. 3,000 devices actually had some kind of a network compromise, a man-in-the-middle attack, or some kind of other network-based attack that was taking place. And then 21,000 devices were actually compromised. So that's bad. Again, as I said before, every one of those compromised devices pose a huge risk for us as an organization. So last thing, and we're going to wrap up here. And if anyone has any questions, as I said earlier when we first got started, submit those questions into the Q&A. If there are any when we finish up, I'll go ahead and get those addressed by either Rajiv or myself. So one of the things everybody always asks us, and we like to just try to get out in front of it before the questions even need to be asked. If we're using your SDK, what are you guys doing from an engineering standpoint? What is it that you are doing to help ensure that we aren't going to have issues once deployed? So one of the first things, and again, the reason we like to talk about that last customer that I brought up, that single customer had over 25 million users, right? So that is one customer. We've got many customers using this technology. So again, scalability, not a concern whatsoever for us. We have a significant amount of testing that takes place. It scales much, much greater than these as well on a daily basis. Rapid and easy implementation. We have made it our #1 goal to make this simple. Make it easy for any developer to pick this SDK up, get it embedded into their application quickly, without any major efforts. And again, in most cases, for someone adding this to a new app, you can get this done in 15 minutes or less. So passive non-intrusive detection. Rajiv talked about Z9 before. Z9 is not doing anything that will impact the user experience. We're keeping it passive in nature. Everything happens behind the scenes. We alert you through callbacks in the app. All of these things will make sure that your user experience stays the way that it should. So minimal footprint. We will not blow your app. We have, again, constantly trying to figure out ways to decrease the size of our SDK. So it is small. It will not cause you any issues or concerns. And app performance. So again, another big one. Everybody's worried about the performance of their applications, right? We talked earlier. Us as consumers are not very patient people. We want things to happen quickly. So we do testing quite often on how both the performance of our SDK is, how it will potentially impact the apps that we are deploying into. And it's a consistent result, which is that the differences are negligible. You will not see a difference in the performance of your app once deploying our SDK. The data is critical. And this is something that everybody needs to understand is the amount of data that we can provide that you basically have none of it today. I'm confident to say that. It gives you visibility into the operating environment, what's taking place once those apps are being used. You can take that data from our portals, our consoles. You can use our APIs to push them out to other systems that you might have in place already. We make that data available to you to use however you need to use it. And lastly, and Rajiv talked about this again with when he was talking about ZApp and Z9, being able to do in-app remediation to protect yourself when something is identified is critical. So that's, again, the last thing that we focus on, making it really easy and simple for you to do customized remediation in your app to make sure that you're truly protecting yourself. So with that, I'm wrapping up. Rajiv, unless there's anything that you'd like to add, we can summarize things, and then again, we'll check out the questions and see if anything came in.
Yeah, so one of the things that we run into, one of the questions that's generally asked quite a bit is about, hey, I'm building hybrid apps, and all I'm doing is just wrapping some of the web, stuff, and use maybe GPS camera or some, few of the native capabilities. But 80% of my app is all just a web wrapped with, and it's a kind of a hybrid app, but primarily web. Am I at a risk? Or do I have the same kind of a risk as a native app? How do you compare and contrast? And it's a really, really great question because, a lot of the customers who are not the core IT, they generally outsource and they look for faster, easier way to deliver apps to the customers. And hybrid apps definitely are ways to minimize the effort. You build once and you can actually generate for both iOS and Android. So you have a single code branch and whatnot, right? There are ways to cut down your efforts. But from when it comes to security, if you think about it, hybrid apps are nothing but a wrapper. It's a wrapper around the native APIs. So you have all the risk that a native app has and more. The reason I say more is because one, you have this integration layer, which is taking the native APIs and you're wrapping it up. So that integration layer basically injects yet another layer of risk into the app. But more importantly, because the native these hybrid apps are using what you call HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and they're using the web view container. So all your vulnerabilities associated with a browser, which is a lot. Means if you look at your vulnerabilities associated with the operating system and the browser, they're probably equal. So all the browser vulnerabilities apply one-to-one to your hybrid app. So if you look at the overall risk posture, it's way higher as compared to a native apps if you're actually building hybrid apps. So something to think about. That means you should definitely think about protecting them. To the contrary, right? Means I think the popular belief is, oh, if I'm building a hybrid app, I do not need to worry about protecting. It's the other way around. You have a higher risk as compared to a native app. So just wanted to highlight that. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Rajiv. I'm not sure if you saw that in the Q&A or you were just out in front of it because it comes up every time, but we did have a question related to that. So I think you addressed that though. So thank you. I don't think that there's any other questions here. So with that, I think we can get wrapped up. So again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Appreciate the time, Rajiv. You were fantastic as always, so appreciate that. And if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out to us at either Rajiv or my email, or you can get us on the website or for some of our other contact information. So thank you very much.